My podcast is mainly on like entertainment and people creating writers and authors and artists and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So uh, I would love to go, and we will eventually talk about the content of all the books that you write. But to start, I was gonna just go over like my how I came across you, I guess, and just to sort of in reference to what we were talking about before I recorded is like until I started reading your books, I thought I had a pretty decent vocabulary. Like I thought I was fairly well read, and like I mean, I
Uh,
there's so many right away that
yeah.
I can't like I'd never heard the term potentate ever until I
Oh,
think I
really?
had read like I
Yeah.
maybe it just came across,
Yeah.
or
It
even just like
it is a
deluge.
classic word for sure.
Yeah, no one brings it up in casual conversation for sure. It might be like
Yeah.
reading like I don't know scholarly works or something.
So
Um,
one, I mean, I do have a good sized vocabulary, but one of the things I thought I should try and do is not to try and dumb down my use of language when I'm talking about such controversial topics, so that you take right off sort of the table. Well, this isn't somebody, from the hills somewhere, even though I am, um, that they would expect, okay, well, maybe there's a little bit more weight in terms of how he's presenting this type of information.
well, that's man, that's kind of what I want to get into
Yeah,
is like really what it takes to write like the books you write. Like from my perspective, it does read very academic in a
yeah,
sense, or like it's dense and thick and it's
yeah,
hard, and that's where it's almost like hard to even pull back and sort of see it for how insane it really all is. Like it's the most epic, insane story you can possibly think.
Imagine.
Like I
Yeah,
can't think of anything more interesting than like what Genesis 6 conspiracy goes over.
yeah.
And then it's just like and so almost
So
chapter by chapter is just like in
I
itself
know.
is so just like okay, this is another insane thing that you
Yep.
never thought how can all these things connect and but
Well, yeah, as you know, and a lot of it is intentional in terms of the presentation and how the book flows, is because again, I knew how crazy this was going to appear. So how do you keep people interested? How do you keep them paying attention? How do you um, be concerned with attention span and length of book and not have them just say, you know what, I can't wade through this, right? And so I needed to be able to do it in a way that would grab people's attention, respect the sourcing, respect the information, and sort of open a door where people might actually consider it.
yeah, you did a great job of doing that. I mean obviously it seems like it just grows and grows and now like it's become such a thing that it's like your book in itself is like its own subcategory on YouTube of like things that people cover and talk about. It's like uh, um but let's I'll sort of have you formally introduce yourself before we
Yes.
dive too deep on that. Like
Yeah.
what
You,
was your
you,
career before you started writing?
yeah. Well, we can, you can go anywhere you want to go. I'll talk a little bit about my private life, but not a whole lot of detail.
Yeah, as much as you want to share, no worries.
Yeah, because of a lot of the information I put out isn't what people wanted put out. So
Yeah, I'm sure.
if I can put it that way.
Yeah, let's keep it hidden. Well, but like,
But yeah, I'll talk a little bit generically about it. Absolutely. Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
I'm just really curious as like, really, what was your start as an author? Like, what was the first
Yeah.
thing, and what was your start as writing? I know
Yep.
that
No,
in
we'll
general,
get
because
in.
I've watched your other interviews and stuff,
Yeah,
but for my audience who has no idea,
absolutely. We'll get into all that. Just, yep.
you can go into it whenever.
Are we recording right now?
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
and
I
for the
don't do
show,
any
but
formal
yeah.
intro. I don't say like "Welcome to the show." It's
Oh,
I'll
okay.
edit out any kind of weird
Okay. I
parts,
thought
but
I thought that was how what part of what you're going to want covered on the show. So, yeah, so I backed my way into it in terms of not only researching the Bible, but then deciding, can I write a book? Um, because I don't have a university education. I'm not a minister. I didn't go to seminary school. Didn't have a platform. And so I thought, well, the best way to get all the information that I've researched out is to write a book. But can you get published? Can you even write a book? I've never written a book. Can I even write a book? Would anybody publish it? Would anybody read it? Would anybody buy it? Would anybody like it? I didn't know any of that, but I just thought there's information here and a narrative that needs to be told, and I'll just sort of tell the tale. And I'll let the writing of the book take me where I wanted to go. Did I do an outline? Absolutely, I did an outline, but that got blown up after 10 chapters because I decided to add a little bit more information to the book that took me down all these different rabbit holes of polytheist religions and secret societies and mystery schools and all sorts of things like that that took me down the rabbit holes forever, almost seemingly. And I kept adding same 10 chapters are still in the book. It just became 98 chapters and a preface and an epilogue. And I took 350 pages out of the text just to try and get it published.
Yeah, I mean, I have your books here. Like for the people, like even in your background, it's like we see the
Yeah.
covers, but people don't realize this is just one, and then
Yeah.
you had a second one that's equally thick. Like these are
Yes.
thick books.
Actually,
Uh,
slightly smaller because I did promise my readers that I wouldn't write as large a book for the second one. So it's a little bit less, maybe 60 pages less or so.
I mean, I've listened to the audiobook and and still like, it's still not all clicked together.
Yeah.
Um, well, we'll get into that in a
Yeah.
second, but I guess like, what was the first thing that what were the first 10 chapters that you started writing that then sprawled? Like, where did you start?
Yeah.
Was it
Well, what
the
I wanted to
flood or I
do,
don't know?
yeah, what I wanted to do was sort of I had most of the research you know was done on biblical prophecy, and we'll talk about why that is on the show. But so I had all of these binders, and as I was doing the research, I came across the giant. So I started to log all of that. And then when I decided, well, I have enough information here to actually 15 books or more. But that's when I started to ask the question, well, how would I go about doing that? And if I did do it, what would be that topic? So what I did was I chose something kind of fun because I had this sort of oopart verse in Genesis 6 with the giants, right? And I decided, and I had accumulated all the information on it, and I knew about mythology and its connections. But so what I tried to do is say, okay, can I write a book that I can connect Genesis 6 with the end times? And I did 10 chapters pretty quick on that. But when I decided to add in context for non-Christians, that's where the book went down a whole different set of rabbit holes for over a decade.
That's what I was gonna ask is how long did it take you to write it? Over 10 years?
Over 10 years, yeah. So I started in about 1996 and I was ready for publication around 2013. And I was still researching and editing and stuff like that at that time. And then I started to look for a publisher, and I had no idea how difficult that process was and how difficult it is to get published. So the book comes out in late 2015, like December of 2015. So um, it took a while to get it published, and then it took a while for the sales to sort of start to move forward in a way that, do I want to continue this or not? Because it's one thing to say, I hit my goal, I published a book, but now is it going to resonate? And what do you have to do to keep that book front and center? Because if that information is as important as I thought it was and still do, then I have to deal with this competition of 25,000 new books being published every 3 months. And how do you keep shelf space or attention span on your book with that type of competition?
Yeah, well, you would think with like what it is, it does sort of just speak for itself. Like it has to win. Like with what you're covering, or that's how
Yeah,
I see it. But
yeah.
I'll like this portion, I'll probably I'll make this like the show, and so
Sure.
like
Yep. You can
um
use any part that you want. I always make sure
okay,
that I'm going to,
because now I'm like, can you summarize, especially for
yeah.
I want to hear how you summarize it, but also for the people that don't know what the Genesis 6 conspiracy is. What is like the premise of it, and what is the conspiracy itself?
Yeah. So the premise is this plotting to take this oath of Heremanathema to carry it out to the end, no matter what the consequences were by the fallen angels, to try and ensure the Adamites, who were created for a special commission, not reach their destiny. And so that oath, and by extension, the actions thereafter, was to create a demigod race of spurious offspring that would get sort of the blood on their hands to give the fallen angels plausible deniability that they didn't do it. They may have created the scenario to do it because they know how powerful the God Most High is. So they don't blaspheme God. It's only their demigods that do it, or their followers. And so they're very, very careful not to cross thresholds to be punished beforehand. And so that's the conspiracy, is to wipe humankind from the face of the earth, not to be remembered anymore, so that it justifies their rebellion and wins a place on their own, away from God, on the earth, and running it independently.
That's such like a uh, how it's like how do you even like it's to the layman's term it's like wait, I don't even know where to begin to like confront that, but it's like
Yeah.
where that leads to physically, it's like, you know, I guess I'll give my sort of summary. It's like if you're looking at the world today and
Yep.
you're just like there are nation states and there are rulers,
Yep.
potentates of like the if you and it's almost like biblically, if you read the Bible, a lot of it is just sort of explaining like genealogy of people. It, like
Yep.
and you're basically going through it and being like, this has been like the same families since
Yes.
before the floods,
Yep.
that, you know, basically angels and then demigods and then or what we call the Nephilim have been secretly like a ruling race for all of time for this specific conspiracy or covenant to essentially for
Yep.
this big greater spiritual kind of goal. But on a
Yeah.
physical world where we look at it, it's like what that means is you're seeing sort of an a hidden race that's like
Yeah.
overseeing everything in a
A,
sense.
a hidden race and a hidden history, and trying to
Yeah.
make sense out of our world today without understanding how we got here makes no sense. So we watch what goes on in the world today, and we get told this pablum by the news media that may have some basis of truth, but doesn't get to the heart of what causes all of these geopolitical, religious, technological shifts that continue to go on. And so the only way to understand that is you have to go back and say, when did this hegemony start? And what did that organizational structure look like? And how did that roll forward to see where we are today? Because if you look at what Putin is doing today, it makes no sense unless you understand the things that I talked about and what he believes. So yes, it's an important doctrine, so to speak, or concept and understanding to understand that the Bible is talking about biblical lineages heavily towards those that are in Israel and in the church, but it also outlines the other bloodlines that we're in this seed war with. And they track those genealogies extensively in the polytheist world. and they take them all the way back into prehistory and back to their patriarchal Nephilim patriarchs and back to their father and parent and mother. So let's call them tongue in cheek, because I know there's going to be some people that are not monotheist all out in the audience today. Tongue in cheek, I like to call them celestial mafia godfathers and mothers.
Yeah. To anybody that hasn't read it, that would just like go, what has to just go over your, because I mean, for me, it was like until I
Yeah.
really like all of this is still like still hard to grasp. And that's where it's like kind of what I'm trying to do, it is like go like you go almost like as far back as you can go up to now, and I'm almost trying to think about how to take it backwards. Like how can I look at today? And that's what I'm
Yeah.
curious with you is like how would you go about it to where it's just like, you know, like I think a lot of the references, at least a lot in the first half, you know, what we're you're looking
Yeah.
at things that are like the references of what sort of these secret histories believe, or what are their doctrines, and where do you get that information from? It's from sort of secret societies and books that are
It's,
written by
yeah.
people within those societies, or people that write about the people that and what they have said, or it's or so it becomes like a lot of these, you know, to someone in modern day look at it, it's easy to go, that's pseudoscience, that's Rex
Yeah.
Deus, that's a made up thing that someone.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, like, how do you sort of solidify
So,
like this, what's
yeah.
real and what's not?
Yeah. It's a good question. And a couple of premises that I wanted to do was is I didn't want people to say I was misquoting what other people believe. So I use their sources and let them speak in their own words, and I give you the footnotes and the bibliography to go verify that that's what they said, that's what they wrote. I also use their religions that they base all of that on and quote that for their sources and name their religions. And so now you have their culture, and then you see their actions as I connect that throughout the history and say, this is what they're doing based on what they believe. So if you want to understand it from today's perspective in a quick snapshot, I would probably say, let's take us back just over 100 years. Let's go back to World War One. And in World War One, we have all of these European nations that are going to war, and there's an East and kind of a West alliance, and it spills over into the Middle East to a certain degree as well. But we have to understand that the Hanover Windsors of England are first cousins with Kaiser Wilhelm's family, and they intermarry. We need to understand that there's intermarriage through the dethroned Anjou of France that still work behind the scenes in the government. There's intermarriage between the Bourbon family of Spain, the Anjou of Italy, known as the Savoy kingdoms, the von Habsburgs of Austria, the Romanovs of Russia, which is a junior offshoot of the Puchyanin out of Kiev. These are all first cousins. They intermarry, and even more. I'm just saying they're all on a first name basis. They would visit each other as children. This is a family squabble. And it leads into a settlement into World War II. And now you're going to have uh, something that's going to spread over into the families behind the government and rule China until the early 1900s with the Shah dynasty or the House of Shi and Shah. And we have a Shi on the presidency back in control there today from the Western branch, and the Yamamoto bloodline, which is an offshoot of the Shi bloodline of the Shah dynasties. So we have these bloodlines all over the world of royales, and royale is a word that they use in plain sight in front of us, and it means kings of God. It goes back to Old French roi, R-O-I, and Al is a transliteration for El for an angel or a god in Hebrew. So when you look at one of their chief gods as an offspring god after the flood, Baal, Baal, You might even see it spelt Bael or just Bel, but it's the same God, but it means Lord God or husband God or master God. So that Al is a transliteration of El, just as it's used in Royale. And Royale is, as I say, it means kings of God. It goes back to regalis and regal and words like that in Latin. That goes back to Proto-Indo-European or Proto-Indo-Aryan or Sanskrit as reg, R-E-G, for ruler. This is the language of the giants with the Proto-Indo-Europeans, the Proto-Iranian, the Proto-Sanskrit original languages of the five groups of giants, meaning taking a name of Aryan as a generic name because it means the noble ones, the nobility, the first two classes that they set up to rule the world, and pushed the humans down to the third and fourth classes. And so when we look at that kind of new new order that was being shifted between World War I and World War II, we saw power play of the Western bloodlines who created something like social masonry out of one of their secret society groups that they created to send over to Russia to wipe out the Romanov dynasty because it was a rival that wasn't playing ball with what they wanted done. And all of these families want to be the family that rules the world. So even though they work directionally together, there's a rivalry and a war gene that has existed with them ever since their creation. And then this social masonry gets out of control in Russia after World War I. So what do? They create National Socialism as something that's got a little bit more, call it private enterprise in there with oligarchs, but still working essentially in the same way. It's just a modification of it. And this national left-wing socialism is designed, created to defeat communism. But that gets out of control. So the bankers, which is also part of their secret societies and organizational structures, start to fund the Western allies to win the war because they've created two things that are out of control. And then what they do is they send this social masonry virus over to communist China to create communist China, a better way of putting it, that brings down that government and replaces it with Mao Zedong. And as a sort of an after sort of thought, it brings down the Japanese dynasty as well. So understand it as a, let us call it an entertainment allegory of the Game of Thrones, of the House of Dragon.
Yeah.
From right, because dragon is part of their allegories for their patriarchal bloodlines.
Yeah, so yeah, there's so many avenues to go in on this, but like for right now, it's like kind of going through my head is like maybe the bigger question of all this is like, you know, from a super wide perspective outside in, you would go, okay, if this sort of ruling bloodlines elite of essentially as far back as you can remember of sort of these Nephilim rulers, if you're saying they have this kind of single agenda, but nowadays when you look at it, it's as if all of those bloodlines and the secret societies that are sort of ruling everything are all against each other, and it's a true Game of Thrones to become like, what's the
Yeah, they're
disconnect that
never
I'm missing to where it's
yeah,
like,
they're never all
uh,
against each other. That's the disconnect.
yeah,
There's
like so it's like
alliances.
humans are just a like
Not
a
quite. No, not quite.
okay,
So so the first thing to understand, humans are just, we're going to get rid of them.
okay,
Okay, so not part of the ruling elite, elite elites, Elim, angel people, majestic bloodline, the I am, as the ancient suffix term was in ancientology. Um, they formed what they call things called alliances, right? So that they would work together against other groups. But if you understand their religious theological structure, it's good versus evil, both on the macro level against God as being what they would call the evil God of the universe, and they're the good people of of the universe and the good gods. And inside the religion, there's this duality as well. So you have the micro and the macro. So the micro is white magic and black magic. It is good kings and evil kings. It is white hats and black hats, which is the terminology that they're using today. And it's been part of that history all the way through. So the difference is that you have these other rivalries that are going on. There can only be one. And then you have this divide within in terms of what type of approach are you going to use. So the white hats, they say they have humankind's better interest at heart. The black hats say, let's get rid of them now. Just I'm saying more simply than how it actually sort of plays out. But those are the two main sort of thrusts. The issue, though, is for a monotheist versus a polytheist, is that they both worship the same pantheon of gods and have the same goal, but different ways of getting there. And one believes it's easier just to destroy us first. The other one says, no, it's easier to get where we want to be by using them. And so they use this pulls apart strategy, whether it's in politics, as extreme left and right, to cattle herd people into the same area they want you to go to fulfill their plans. So
They always win.
they always win. Yes. They rigged the game because they have all the money. They have control of the armies. They control the education. They control all of the religions and all of the banking and all of the industry through the oligarch aspects, and part of why they had to put that back in as sort of a improvement over communism, because they needed their money to work, not have the government take their money, right? They still want to be in absolute control and be in the puppeteers. So it's important to understand how this plays out. And they're all trying to get the whole world back under one world government. They want to create a stepping stone to that family taking over, and that requires, in polytheist prophecy all around the world, getting to a universal religion and a world government. And typically the allegory is 10 kings. 10 was a standard before the flood. It's a standard for the end time in polytheism. And the 10 kings is used in the allegorical Atlantis, not that it was allegorical, but the concept that you had 10 kings created by Poseidon and Cleito in the standard version that comes down through Timaeus and Critias by Plato, 10 empires that were trying to take over the world in this technologically advanced age before the flood. But the flood comes along and prevents that from happening. So 10 is that constant before the flood, which you see in all cultures all around the world, which is not sort of logically understood. If they were disparate cultures that never associated with each other, just as they had the same pantheon of gods, just different cultures, they did the same architecture, they have the same history. It's just inexplicable to say that there wasn't some sort of communication between the antediluvian or early post-diluvian worlds. They just had to be because of what we get out of it. That is very, very solid in the record. And so this 10 is the 10 kings of Atlantis, or the new age of Atlantis that Francis Bacon talked about in the New Atlantis, the inspirational founder for the Royal Society, and was the second most powerful person in England in the time of Queen Elizabeth, and then again in King James, who authored or sponsored the writing of the King James Version Bible, and some interesting markers that would probably not be there if it wasn't King James who decided he wanted to do that. And So in the end time, they're going to see this, they see this new Atlantis as a stepping stone for the great Lord Maitreya to step out, or the Grand Monarch, as another term that the Europeans would use, or as we would know it as the new Buddha, or King Sudra was the name of another individual like that before the flood. And that we get that biblically with the 10 kings, the 10 horns, and the 10 toes of the seventh beast empire in the end time. That makes the way for the little horn or Antichrist to come to power at the midpoint of the last 7 years. So they're wanting to get to that destiny. They want a rendezvous with a showdown, but we have to be technologically advanced and they have to be in control of the world to make that happen. Fortunately for the world, for the humans, is that they haven't been unified enough yet to get there. And they're always divided in almost like an east and west sort of axis of powers, right? There's always this grand balance of power that they created early on. And so, but again, look at that as the duality, because we look at an Eastern alliance, so to speak, as the evil ones. They look at us as the evil ones.
Yeah.
It's the same concept.
Well, then that's kind of where I'm curious, like how do you see it as like if it's sort of their own dynamic of East and West and different
Yeah,
the black hats and white hats
yeah.
that are playing for the same team, who is the true opposition? Is it humans or is it specifically sort of Christian or like who are of those of us that are the actual heroes that seem to be winning? Because you would think that if they have
Yeah.
control of both sides of the coin and they have forever and they're still struggling, what is it that we're doing to where we're actually, the majority of the world is just, riding
Well,
along like it's not a problem?
they actually have control of most of the population, but the two large pillars of monotheism of the three are very powerful. Christianity crosses many countries and is quite a powerful force that they're always opposed to. And Islam is the other one that crosses many countries and continents and is very powerful, that is also opposed to the polytheist way of setting up the world. So what they're fighting against is that sort of belief system that they will also have to get under control. You can do things militarily and geopolitically, but you also have to be in control of the religious aspect of it. And it's going to take some significant changes for that to happen, aka the false prophets that will come along predicting prophecies that are contrived that would destroy us from the face of the earth unless we convert to this true religion, this ancient religion that was before the flood and early after the flood that we would recognize as Zoroastrianism. Enochian mysticism, as I like to refer it to, before the flood. And so they're going to have to bring about this, what we call in from the monotheist perspective, this mystery Babylon religion that controls the 10 kings. That's going to have to be in place. So we're a ways away from getting there yet, but we see a whole bunch of other sort of geopolitical pieces starting to come into play. We have this alien disclosure thing that might overturn a lot of preconceived notions this way and that way, add technology or whatever else, or you unite us in different ways. We're going to have to see some large changes and shifts that's going to speed up this sort of slow march to the direction of a one world government and universal religion.
Yeah, it seems like if what they're because a lot of what you go into in the book, or I guess I say like in the book, but it's just like what's happening in the world, or like it's just like so you talk about uh, is it like the Antichrist and there's sort of the idea of the center of sort of the Antichrist is the Vatican or like or Rome, I think in particular as sort of like the end times
Yeah,
point.
yeah,
The question relating to that is like
okay,
it seems to be like there are truths that we follow, or I guess as you would say, like monotheistic, like the word of God, or sort of the path
yep,
to the right path in a sense, and they can be followed through these things like through Christianity, but the opposing forces, these Nephilim bloodlines have to
yep,
infiltrate these things and sort of trick us into thinking sort of like in to go the wrong direction. But there's still a lot of us that are sort of,
yeah,
even though they have controls of the populations,
yep,
our thoughts, or at least our free will, seems to be still guided in the right direction. And that's where
yep.
they have to sort of, the trick needs to escalate and they need to
It does.
just,
It does. And in preparation for that, they counterfeit everything. So when you say, from a monotheist perspective, that there's a certain path and truth to eternity and to being resurrected, they have the same type of saying. They call it the way, and it's the way of Tao
Tao,
or the
or
way of
yeah.
Taoism. Yeah, and they have sent many people that have special qualities throughout the ages to help us be on that path and get to the next level of spiritual evolution, like Buddha, like Confucius, like Hermes, like Mohammed. They would include Jesus in on that from a polytheist. So they adopted into that global um, sort of stew of religions, but they're trying to bring it back to the original religion that was worshiping the same pantheon of gods. But everything like that, like the way, is counterfeited. And if you're on this side, you say the other side's counterfeited, right? So you get sort of into that sort
Yeah.
of intellectual stalemate very quickly on, which one is the right way. And that's, of course, ultimately the big choice for the end time. But they counterfeit everything that God does. So just as God has a council of gods in heaven, there's a council of gods that rules the earth. And it rules the earth even to this day. Um, Typically, it's understood at being at Mount Hermon, but in another dimension, and the same place where El and Baal of the Bible would worship from. El was the parent god before the flood, Baal, offspring god after the flood, and he would come through the gateway of Hades to inspect his realm at certain periods. And so this is Mount Saphon of the Ugaritic text. Mount Hermon's called the Mountain of the North. That's Semitic and Hebrew Saphon. It's the same location where Nippur was at. So it's a central sort of location. But there are, in polytheism, 7 other mountains around the world as well that are sacred. But that's got to do with the hierarchy of the council of the gods. Hierarchy is a Greek word that means sacred assembly of archons. And Mount Olympus, where you would associate that with as one of those 7 mountains, just to sort of give an understanding what I'm talking about. This is the council of gods that rules the earth. And they've counterfeited that based on what God has in heaven. And then they created at Mount Hermon what the Ugaritic text calls the assembly of the Titanu, which is the assembly of their spurious offspring, and gave them the divine right to rule. Right. So this is what sort of begins after the flood using the Ugaritic accounts as to this organizational structure. And so they have their own counterfeit religion. The same religion has the same God. So if you look at the pantheons around the world, you've got, like, for offspring gods, I'll start with that for the ones that people would be most familiar with, is Baal is the equivalent of Osiris. Osiris and Baal are the same as Zeus. And you can go with that sort of all around the world with these offspring gods. And you can do that with their consort gods as well. So before the flood, you would have Anu in the Sumerian pantheon, which is the chief god. You would have El in the Canaanite pantheon. You have Ra or Ta in the Egyptian pantheon. You would have Uranus or Kronos in the Greek pantheon. And again, go all around the world. They're just different vernacular names for the same gods, except that the offspring God is different than the parent God. But so you've got seven of those, which are the ruling ones, right? The main seven. And there's 70 nations both before and after the flood that they rule over. So and they're the chiefs of the tens, which gives you the 70 nations. And they rule with the God over each one of those. And when Jesus actually was, before he started his commission in Galilee, he was in the desert for 40 days fasting. Satan comes along, says, kneel before me and worship me, and I'll give you all these kingdoms around the world that I control. So their legality to rule until the end time wasn't contested even by Jesus, because it's still playing out the full plan as to what that resolution is going to be. And so we need to understand the reason why it gets so difficult is because it is so similar. It's just that it's done through a polytheist lens versus a monotheist lens. And you're worshiping a different God in monotheism to the pantheon of gods. But literally, things were designed in the polytheist religions, and they would say vice versa, to be similar. So you have bloodline priests that come down in Israel with the Levites. You have bloodline priests that come down through the polytheist religions as well, whether it's the Brahmins or the Druids, wherever you go, they're all bloodline priests of the upper two classes. And they control all of the religions. And they do that even when Christianity is formed. By the time of Constantine, he's going to merge Mithraism, which is a branch of Zoroastrianism into Christianity. And the elite are going to provide all of the ministers, all of the priests, all of the leaders of the church from the royal families and the nobility families because they're the only ones that are being educated. So they quickly gain control of monotheism, which is how they infiltrate us and try and insert polytheist doctrines like the interpretive approach onto the literal understanding of the Bible. And they use things like hermeneutics, which comes right out of polytheism. I mean, Hermes is the etymological root for hermeneutics. Hermes is the equivalent to Enoch, the evil son of Cain, versus Enoch, son of Jared from the Seth line. There's two Enochs that are talked about in the Bible. And in the third book of Enoch, Enoch is raised and his name changed to Metatron because he becomes a god through the knowledge in that account. Thoth is a god of wisdom in the Egyptian pantheon, raised to godhood status because of his wisdom and knowledge. Hermes and Mercury are the same in the Greek pantheon. Idris is the same one in the Quran that's talking about Enoch, and on and on and on around the world. So again, you have these things that are seemingly very similar in each of the religions, but the main difference is what's the end goal and which group of angels represent God and which angels represent Satan. That's what
It's
you're trying to
so
sort of discern.
in like yeah, it's so insane how confusing it can be. Literally two
Yeah,
Enochs, one good, one evil.
yeah,
Two religions that are all designed to be so similar and both
yeah,
following seemingly the same path, but having completely opposite different directions
yeah.
and goals. But
Two Lamechs in that line as well, and then all the other ones seemingly are almost pronounced exactly the same, just spelled a little differently.
and I may be wrong in memory of this, but isn't it like if you kind of go through a lot of these ancient texts where you're referencing from, it's as if some of these people also switch sides. So
Yeah.
it's like in one time period they're sort of good, and then in a later time period they're bad, or like on the other side of the of an agenda. But um, I'm curious, like, have you tried to almost make a physical map of sort of what, like you were saying that you could connect World War I, the families of people and how they were related to each other
Yeah.
that were on opposing sides of the
Yeah.
war. have you taken sort of the royal bloodlines and just gone backwards and like done family trees of how people are connected to each other through marriage, through bloodlines, through
Yeah.
societies to today?
It's virtually impossible to do that.
I
It's just
figured.
it's so big with so many siblings and branches and countries and nations and intermarriages where they graft and scion.
And then
So
they
when I
changed their
was
names.
and then they changed their names, absolutely. And like the Hanovers and the Windsors, they changed their names. Um, so when I was looking at the research to sort of put this together, I thought, the best way is to let their own genealogists do it. So that's why I used in book one Lawrence Gardner, because he's one of the genealogists of several families. And he actually, in all of his books, tries to give you a quick snapshot of a lot of these genealogies that are tracked. But it's so big, it's so complicated, and you're dealing over, depending on whether or not you think they survive their flood or not. Even if they don't, you're still dealing with, over 2,000 years of genealogies and branches, and as they spread out around the world.
Well, this is where I was going to get to the sort of your take on like if if the end if they're if they're sort of so vast and it's almost like what's happening
Yep.
is the real game or the real show that's happening is sort of these royal bloodline families doing
Yep.
their own thing and humans are in a sense just sort of the spectators of what's the real, if you say all the world's a stage, the
Mhm.
royal bloodlines are the ones on the stage putting on the show. But the whole concept of this is basically the angels and Nephilim interbreeding with humans and creating these hybrid
Yes.
bloodlines. And
Yes.
so at what point is it like to where we're sort of all intermingled with them and we're sort of unseparated entirely? Or like is that part of it to where the pure humans versus sort of the ruling elite bloodlines of like what's going to happen in a sense to it seems like we're already too far deep to where it
Yes.
for it to matter so much anymore. Like this, we're our own thing now.
Yeah, I think to a certain degree that that's sort of an inevitability. And so what they do is they track their own genealogy. So they have all of these ancient books and they have them all loaded on genealogical programs and stuff today, but they didn't always have that, right? And so what they created, and I'll get to um, the last part of what you were talking about in a second. Um, they would create something that if they were traveling somewhere, that the people in that realm or that country or territory or whatever would recognize who they are. And when they saw something, they would recognize who those people are. And they called them back then standards and banners that we know today evolved into the heraldic coats of arms, which is taciturn imagery for their bloodlines that would go back to, giant patriarchs and to celestial mafia godparents. So we see imagery that would be on those coats of arms, like, a dragon, which is a seraphim angel, or an eagle, which is one of the faces of a cherubim, or a lion, another face of a cherubim, a bull, another face of a cherubim. Um, you have unicorns as well, which is an allegory for a cherubim as well. And so they have all sorts of other imagery on there. I won't do a whole history lesson on the heraldic aspect, but and you'll see sometimes you might see a lion and a dragon on there. Well, that's telling you there's a intermarriage or a scioning or a grafting in of two very, very powerful purebloods back to different watchers. Okay. And when they intermarriage through other families downstream, you see, well, let's say you go to an Anjou or a Hanover or Windsor coat of arms, and it changes a little bit in a generation. That's because of another marriage, and they're putting that into it. so that you have this string of the evolution of that. And genealogical trees is what their creation to track all of that. So within that is the word genealogy, which in that is the word gene. And I have a chapter in book one called The Gene of Isis, which is one of their allegories. And that's also a word that they used for a transliteration or double entendre, might be a better way of putting it, for Genesis. So it's their history and their beginning in terms of their people, with Isis, a mother goddess. Hopefully that goddess I shouldn't have used there. If you're on YouTube, they may not like that. They may zap that
Oh,
one. But I'm talking about an ancient goddess. I'm not talking about what they want to take it down for.
yeah.
Um, Sorry about that.
No
But it's
worries.
important to understand this gene sort of aspect of it. So they track their genses. And so that would be one allegory. It's very much similar to the fairy um, uh, gens in terms of the matriarchal bloodline. But the most famous ones are the Elbe gens, which is more of a Norse bloodline from the Norse gods or Odin. And it's called the Elbe gens, meaning Latin and hoary white, as in pale white as the skin of the giants. And a gens coming out of Latin, meaning a single patriarch to start that bloodline, that family dynastic bloodline. And so you have other ones that are out there like the Fabia gens or the Claudia gens or the Julia gens out of the Italian black nobility. And those are gens that sort of come down through Julius Caesar and Augustus for the Julia gens is one example, but back to specifically the 100 families of Rome who come from Romulus and Remus, who are the offspring of um, Ares or Mars in the Latin pantheon, the war god. And so that's that gens. You have a cretagens, which comes down through Zeus. And Zeus creates giants, many types of giants, in particular Hercules through Alcmene, a human female. And that's part of the Herculides royal bloodlines that are showing up with the Tyrannos dynasties in Assyria and Anatolia, the Greek islands, and parts of mainland Greece. And that's the Cretagens from KRT originally, because Zeus spent a lot of time on Crete, which is the Semitic vowelless word for Crete, KRT. So they have all of these different genses that come down. And it's the gene that you need to follow. And it's the gene that is going to produce a specific blood type that is associated with the royales, which is the Rh negative blood. So most people will say, from a layman's perspective, an argument that somewhere along the line, this Rh negative is inserted in somehow into the positive bloodline. The dating of that is not definite, but the issue with that getting to be is, how do you insert something that's missing the D antigen? How do you insert something that's not there? Which is a conundrum, except that you can't track the bloodlines that way. You have to track it through the genes. It's the gene that produces the blood type. And that usually passes down through the females, and it can skip a generation as well. So typically, we understand the Rh negative blood as being 15% of the world's population. So it's not like it's been mass distributed. It is, but it would be larger because we don't probably don't know everybody's blood type around the world yet. We're getting there. And that it can skip a generation. And then that would happen, uncountable amount of times in every generation. So but 15% is sort of the standard number, but it's weighted heavily to the Royales, and particularly the most dominant group are the Basques that run, depending on the survey, anywhere from 50% to 80%, Rh negative. And it's just an uncanny sort of number, but they, in their mythos, call themselves the Homo Atlanteans. They're the ones who survived the flood and started the Egyptian Sumerian or Sumer um, uh, Scythia and then settled into southwest France and northern Spain um, to resettle the world. And so they are a unique language as well. That's not equated with anything with Proto-Indo-European or any of the traditional other languages. So they're a rather unique people. But there's something to that weight of where that Rh negative is located. And they believe there's special traits that they have as Rh negative as well. So again, in the surveys, just as there's been surveys done with the star people, the aliens, and understand that the Tuatha De Danann Scythians call themselves the star people. Stars are gods and angels in allegory, both biblically and in polytheist religions. Stars are each angel or god has a star associated with it. The seven wandering stars, that populate our days of the week, and the seven Satans in the book of Enoch, and the seven major gods of each pantheon around that's below this nebulous Satan individual. These are, like Venus and the moon and the sun and Jupiter and Saturn and Mercury and Venus. And they're a little bit different because they're more important, and they're called wandering stars because they rotate around, or vice versa, whatever your belief system is, the sun. And so but they're raised to a different level because of their importance in terms of the hierarchy that we talked earlier. So it's this gens. They believe that um, the survey shows, and it's the same with the NASA surveys with the people who say they've been abducted by aliens, that these Rh negative people have a IQ that averages higher than 140. They generally have pale white skin. They generally have red hair or blonde hair, hazel eyes or blue eyes. They have lower they have lower blood pressure. Um, they can tend to have an extra vertebrate, all sorts of other things. And one of the other ones, and there's just this huge common denominator amongst them. Um, but the interesting thing in all of the surveys is they don't believe they can be cloned for some reason. And again, we
Hmm.
don't get an answer for that, but they don't believe they can be cloned. So when you're tracking how that mixes, I think we have to look at the genes and the genealogies, which is why we've had so much database done for people to volunteer their information so that you can track your own genealogy.
So crazy that all this it gets so extreme it falls into the realm of just like magic or just sort of
But
like
yeah,
nonsensical, but it's like all this is like on very physical. It's like there are like limitations, and it's almost like scientific mathematical of like why certain things are the way they are. It's like
yeah,
because of genetics, and then at the same time, it's like when it comes to the sort of spiritual aspect of it, it's like legalese. It's like they have to follow this, like they can't break the rules in a sense of how to do things, and so it's just so wild that it's just like all of this is so formulaic, and at the same time like but it seems so gray area, but it's like I guess in when you're following it to a T there, everything has a, I don't know how
has
to
a
put it
reason.
other
Every
than just like
has a
science.
reason, or yeah, it's
Yeah.
and it's not that the polytheist side doesn't want to move things faster, because they do. It's just that they're not permitted to go as fast as they want to go. And they won't be able to until the restrainer is removed from a biblical perspective or from a monotheist perspective. There's an ordained time for things to happen quickly and come together. Just before the flood, you have with the creation of the flood in Noah's generation, and Noah's the one who's the survivor on the ark, even though he has a fairly large age. It's in the last 100 years when his commission starts after the giants have been created that this technology advances to a level we don't have today. And
Yeah.
we're just catching up to it. So it happens very fast with an intercession. But we also need to look at it. It's like the days of Noah from our perspective, and from the polytheist perspective, it would be like as Ellis Bailey said, the externalization of the hierarchy, the externalization of the sacred assembly of archons, translated hierarchy, which is the council of the gods. And what she's talking about and what the Bible is talking about is going to be like the days of Noah, both before and after the flood, because Noah lived 350 years also after the flood, where the gods walked amongst us.
Yeah.
And so they're going to come back. Well, if you're going to have these gods come back, however they're going to be presented to us, if it's going to be like that in both religions, both of the two main religions, monotheism and polytheism, generically stated, then technology's coming with them and the advancements come faster. So things can happen very quickly. And again, we get a passage out of Ecclesiastics, and it's the same adage you said a little bit differently, whether it's in the philosophy of the sciences and the writings, or it's in the polytheist religions, which to me is the same. But Ecclesiastics 1 says, nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again. And the understanding of this is only going to bring grief and sorrow, right? If we don't learn from our, said another way, if we don't learn from our mistakes in the past, we're going to repeat the same things, right? And we've been dumbed down to do that and permit it to continue to happen to us. I mean, if I wanted to look at an attempt to get there before its time, I would look at World War II with Adolf Hitler, who is a polytheist, antichrist archetype figure who creates a polytheist religion called the Reichschurch, which is called Ariosophy. It's Aryan and Grail ideology and real ideology overlaid onto theosophy that comes out of Gnosticism, that also theosophy creates the New Age movement in the West. So that we sort of fully understand that it's an offspring, it's an offshoot that they would call now corrupted by Aryan influence, which is the same. They're all Aryans. But they create this polytheist religion. And now you have an archetype of an antichrist figure. You have a universal religion that they would try and impose on the world because Hitler wants to become leader of the world, the Fuhrer, the leader of the world. And they receive inexplicable knowledge and technology quickly and develop it quickly without proper explanation. They're bankrupt in 1933 when Hitler comes to power and sets up the Reichschurch. They don't have an army, really. They don't have the industrial base to do what they need to do. But all of a sudden, they're creating things like a jet engine. They're creating a rocket engine. They're creating single wing aircraft. They're creating technology that they're getting close to creating nuclear weapons with. They're creating Tiger and Panzer tanks that are still, for the most part, the platform and design that's used today with their low level and strong armor. And so the shells would bounce off them. And if they could produce any of this stuff in great quantities and numbers, in enough numbers, they would easily win the war with almost any one of them. And so, but where they get this knowledge from is they say it was given to them through their contacts through their religion and secret societies at the adept level, because they're also formed through secret societies like the Germanen Orden or the Tula Society and many other ones. I list them all out in book 1 for people to know all the different organizations that put National Socialism together. But they receive this knowledge by these spiritual guides, aliens, demons, fallen angels, whatever you want to call them, the Celestial White Brotherhood. But they receive that knowledge in terms of how to develop that type of weaponry. And so they advance very quickly. We're seeing something very similar to that now, where, in Operation Paperclip, the Americans wrapped up most of this technology and brought it with it that started their rocket and spaceship programs, right?
Mhm.
But Now we're at a level where we're going way beyond anything ever thought possible sort of before, except through science fiction, which they told us they were going to do this inexplicably. Um, so we're seeing something like the days of Noah starting to ramp up. And how powerful was that technology before the flood? I think they could have destroyed the world by fire, which is why God brought the flood. So that was an intercession. Just as 2 Peter 3 says, this fire of destruction that was there in the beginning is reserved for the end time. And in the polytheist cultures, and particularly through the secret societies and Gnostics in their history and writings, they say that to ensure the antediluvian knowledge, which was more advanced than what we have today, survived, they were going to bury it under the Great Pyramid that they built with this knowledge. And that could be knowledge or technology or both, and their religious writings as well. They were to bury it under the Great Pyramid, but they had the directions written on two different pillars, one that could float and one that could survive destruction by fire. Why? Because they didn't know which was going to happen. They knew destruction was coming. They just didn't know which one. And what's also interesting is as we get into the polytheist side for the end time, the age of Aquarius and all the panic about 2012, but those ages are over 2,000 years. So that particular year shouldn't have been so panic stricken. That's the age of the water bearer where the destruction by fire comes. So again, you have this common destiny and this common history, and they're both inexplicable. They're told through a monotheist lens and a polytheist lens with nuanced differences, particularly the outcomes in the end time. But they could build things like the pyramids. They could build Machu Picchu. They could build all of these great megalithic structures around the world with sacred geometry, earth ratios, celestial alignments, you name the amount of technology it would have to have or knowledge you would have to put that in there, let alone build it. And biblically, we're told the whole earth was corrupted and all flesh was corrupted. Well, that's the Hebrew word shakath, which means to pollute, to ruin, to pervert, to decay, to destroy. So that means all the DNA, all the plant genomes on the earth, not what was in the sea, just what was on the earth. And that means they had DNA technology. And of course, out of polytheism, we get all of this chimera information of these different types of beings that were chimeras. King Hababa of the Cedar Forest, so the Epic of Gilgamesh would be sort of the classic one to go read about and understand that Cedar Forest is at Mount Hermon. That's where Nippur was. So again, you see the same stories being told all around the world of the same types of creatures. And this is the same name that they use that they pull out of Greek mythology for DNA manipulation that we're just learning about now that we can't do what is said to have been done before the flood.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the most epic part of this, or like, kind of what especially drew me in is like just the idea, like, kind of the big revelation of like everything we learned of in the mythos of ancient Greek mythology and stuff, especially like
Yeah,
all, and then like you said, Epic of Gilgamesh. These stories are real, basically, and
yeah,
they had relevance to this day. But what I was going to get to is like it to me when you sort of first hear that or see that or think about it, it makes it to where it's just like, but that doesn't make sense because like I said, it falls into this realm of just like magic. Like when you have
yeah,
these Nephilim gods that literally look like what we would call dragons and monsters, and like that they are have these hybrids like monsters that are rolling around, mermaids and all these sort of things that
yeah,
exist. But and then like up to it's just like and then where it's like once again the like science and sort of philosophy and the religion is like it has to be done organically, and like you said, so in like the archetype of what Hitler was is like
yeah,
these it's as if even though they might be these bloodlines and that everybody's sort of in cahoots, no
Yep.
one just gives everybody everything and says take over. It's like everything has to be done organically, and they still fight each other to be the one
Yep.
that gets there. And
Yeah.
it still leads to, like you said, the same religion, but from polytheistic mind, it's like there's still some kind of ruling force that's like pushing it down and being like
Yep.
only when it's time can you
Yes.
take over. And
Yes.
that's where I think that another disconnect is just like why is that? Or I get, and that's where it's like, I guess, sort of,
Why is there an ordained time? There's a
yeah, I guess, yeah.
some
What's the
some
significance
ex-
of this?
there's some passages in the Bible that talk about the book of life. And the book of life was created from before anything existed. The book of life has all the names of the beings that were going to exist or ever exist in this current epoch. And we have a choice to leave our name in the book of life or have it blotted out. So the ordained time is set down to let things play out through free choice and to ensure all of the names that were written in the book of life from before creation have an opportunity to leave their name in the book of life or have it blotted out based on how they lived their lives and what they believe. And in the same even sort of way all throughout history, except for two periods that would be a little bit distinct just before the flood and in the end time. But still, essentially, it's still the same set of events just repeating themselves, right?
Yeah,
So that's what's at play. That's why God comes in and intercedes with the flood, I think, because the names haven't been fulfilled yet. And the plan hasn't permitted for the word to become flesh to permit ourselves to be raised up to be like angels, even though we have human fathers, and to judge angels for all the crimes that they did against us. And so all of this is sort of playing it out, but it's still God lets it play out through free choice and moderate sort of intercessions to make sure everybody will have that chance to choose. I wanted also to get back to this technology just a little bit, just to throw this out for some people who may not be aware of it. There's a FOIA request that came from Hillary Clinton's office from one of her employees, Dinetra Senegar, and it's FOIA number F-2019021110, and I'll just read it. Um, and understand that Gilgamesh is sixth generation after the flood. He's the offspring of his father, King Lugubanda, king of Uruk, just as Gilgamesh will become king of Uruk. And his mother is the fertility bull goddess, Nin or Ninsen, depending on which um, translation that you're reading on that. So he's a demigod. He's half human, half God. And this FOIA number is requesting for Hillary Clinton's office, who was Secretary of State during the Iraq War for parts of it. So, and very high level, knowledgeable, knowing, secrets of secrets, right?
hmm
Um, Here's what she requested, requesting documents pertaining to the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh, the location of his body, and the location of buried Nephilim. So, three things on here that just sort of blow your mind away. And that's where I pull it off of the government sources and I highlighted it there and then I put the information and the link so I can send it to people and have a better written one on the backside of this page. So a resurrection chamber. We don't have technology for a resurrection chamber. This is after the flood, let alone what they would have had before the flood. That's a technology that would be very, very important. But why do you want the location of Gilgamesh's body? And why would they want to have the body? And why would she want to know the location of other buried Nephilim? Well, that to me says you're after DNA and you want to understand perhaps the bioengineering of these types of creatures for their bone structure and stuff. But we're now, and maybe we're already there and we just don't have it public knowledge, but we may be getting close to either or on that, to being able to create our own Jurassic Park of giants instead of dinosaurs. And so you could do all sorts of things to either create new Nephilim, if you could do that, and then have a demon spirit occupy that into the soul and the body of what you're creating in this physical world, or a whole bunch of hybrid or chimera type of technology as well.
That's another where that reminded me, I wanted to ask you, like, that request is a perfect example of, if, you'd think that sort of she's sort of on the inside, Hillary
Yeah,
Clinton and the people requesting this information, and not just her, but like a lot of these examples of like, well, what you're seeing now behind the scenes is like these people of these secret societies are still trying to figure out the secrets. It's like they're still,
yeah,
it's like as if you realize you're in this grand game and then that there's like still deeper levels and they're going higher
yes,
and higher up in these secret societies to learn more and more and more. And that's what I was saying. It's like someone at the top is limiting everything. They're like forcing everybody to go through the ranks to get to the information. So
yes,
once again, it's just like you'd think that the where when you first are introduced to this kind of a thing, you
yeah,
think that it's just super black and white to where it's like those that know and the rest of us who don't know. But it seems
yeah,
like in reality, it's more like 15% are bloodline, and of
yeah.
those 15%, 14% are like sort of still a
No, not
charade. Like they're
essentially
the
know nothing.
yeah, they still don't know anything, and they
Yeah,
are like trying to climb the ladders to be the
yeah,
first one to learn and then be
yeah,
like, get over on the other side. So it's like
yeah,
the true rulers, the true Nephilim elite are still at the so top that that's why we never see them. That's why you're not
yeah,
seeing monsters. And that's
yeah,
where I want to get your take of like, who do you think, like, where are the Nephilim today? Like, where are the monstrous ones? Did they die
yeah.
out or are they hidden?
Probably, probably a little bit of both. So let's start with what we do know from what the Royals tell us is that, and we get this, back this up sort of biblically as well, is that the post-Diluvian giants or after the flood giants seem to have had a fertility issue unlike the giants before the flood. Yeah, whereas the giants before the flood had great harems. But there seems to be fewer accounts of women, of giants, and a fertility issue. And it shows up from the polytheist side that on these rare humans or these rare female purebloods, they would start new dynasties with them. And through that new dynasty, they would seed it with a pureblood that was a good source for the Rh negative bloodline and gene to go with that. And so we get sort of biblically a couple examples where that would happen. Like you have Esau's brother of Jacob, who is going to marry Oholibama, who's a pureblood Horim giant female. And then his son Eliphaz is going to marry Timnah, also a Horim, and they're going to create new peoples. They're going to create the Horites and the Amalekites, which are hybrids. So giant-like but smaller. So 7 to 9 feet tall, like the Shazu, as the Egyptians called them, and they lived amongst giants like the Anakim. So other peoples would be like Amorites, would be those hybrid giant humans versus hybrid human gods or angels, right? So two classes of giants there. So there's a term that are used for these beings because they weren't nice. I used one earlier, which is tyrannos or tyrant, which is also used as one of the words to describe the Gyges kings of the Herculidi Cretagens bloodline, and also to describe Nephilim, one of the terms, because all the words there, bully, is also a description of who they were. Bulls were a term used for gods, just as the fertility goddess of Gilgamesh's um, uh, angelic mother was Nin. She was a fertility bull goddess. And Gilgamesh is described as a bull. In the Ugaritic text, as another quick example, Baal and the Baalim are all called bulls. because of their fertile and they're strong and other sort of aspects and the two-horn imagery and a bunch of other things. And their offspring, the Rephaim, are also called bulls. So these are the bulls of Bashan that are mocking Jesus on the cross in the book of Psalms. Right. So we understand sort of the imagery. They're also called the terrible ones in Ezekiel 32. That's Erit or Ritim, part of the word of Ugarit. And that was basically the city of Og the Terrible One before he moved over to Mount Hermon after the Rephaim were almost wiped out in the war in Genesis 14. So these terrible ones are ones that are talking to another terrible one, Pharaoh, and by the time frame in history would be Pharaoh Necho, and also the terrible one of nations, Nebuchadnezzar, who's going to take out Pharaoh Necho as he establishes his Babylon empire. And so these are the terrible ones that were sent to the pit prison when they died because of how horrible they were and the horrible things they did to humankind. So King Hababa of the Cedar Forest is also specifically called the terrible ones, authorized to do terrible things to humans. So you see the consistency of this term as we go through. And this is a seed line that we want to be very much aware of, a seed line that is going to, that's called a branch of the terrible ones that are going to be destroyed in the end time. But in the Psalms, this fruit is going to be destroyed from the earth in their seed from the children of men. Different seed line war that's going on is going to be removed in the end time. So we want to sort of understand how terrible these beings were, and that these continued to be the ruling class downstream with this fertility issue, with Eretim being the word I pull that fertility issue out of in its definition. They had a fertility issue. They were childless, and it seems to be replicated in not having human females, which is why they have to intermarry with humans, but as little as possible, but enough to keep their DNA as pure as possible, but also so that they don't go extinct. But they can't marry too closely within the bloodlines as well because they're going to get hemophiliac disease or the classic Habsburg jaw disease, which emphasizes the intermarriage of the royals through the royal family of the Habsburgs, right? And it's been that way all the way through the history that they do just enough to ensure their DNA is sort of regenerated with humans. And they lost over time the size because
Yeah.
of adding more in. They lost a lot of their looks. And so that has continued to happen. But they believe they are the descendants of the giants. And whether or not they actually are or not, what we ought to be concerned with is they believe it, and it's what they're doing with their belief system that we want to be aware of and concerned about. Now, could giants have survived into our age? Possibly, but you wouldn't be able to likely do it, um, at least in the last couple hundred years, very hard to hide such size of beings. And how big of beings are we sort of talking about? Well, Gilgamesh, because we've been talking a lot about him, he is described in the Ugaritic text, which is between Mount Hermon and Tyr versus the Euphrates River and east into the Sumer region, where most of the Ugaritic texts where most of the Gilgamesh texts were recorded. Disparate civilizations with the same account and the same dimensions. All of those accounts state him as 11 cubits tall and 4 cubits wide. As a royal cubit, as king of Uruk, he would be 19 feet tall and 7 feet wide. These aren't just a foot
Yeah.
taller than
He'd
us.
stand out.
These are monsters. Yes, these are terrible ones. So if they're going to survive, they would have to be in very remote areas, like in mountains and in
Which is where
caves
we
and
do
hiding
get, there
some
are like
accounts.
cases where
Yes.
people see them. Yeah. In mountains
Like
in
the
like
Af
South America.
yeah, and the Afghanistan giant, that Steve Quayle had on Coast to Coast with and interviewed the pilot that was there. So that's the only way they could be, because what happened over time as you had this balance switch over to the human side of the size of nature, these other ones would have been hunted down, just as Israel was taking them out in the covenant land during the covenant land wars. So the only other way could be through a stasis or a technology similar to the resurrection chamber, but just to hold them in stasis through a sarcophagus type of encasement, and either hidden in the earth or in another dimension. Or you could have had giants rescued by fallen angels, both before and after the flood, and kept them in other dimensions or somewhere off the earth. That's the only really other ways you could do it, right?
Yeah.
So if it's going to be like the days of Noah, we should see these giants coming back again. So we're either going to see them recreated or we're going to see them come from wherever and however the gods and fallen angels help them to survive, or it's just the descendants. But I kind of take the word literally like the days of Noah. We had giants both before and after the flood. I think we're going to see them again.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I mean, it's all that's what's so brilliant about all this is like it all makes sense and it all seems to be happening now to where you're like seeing disclosure
Yeah,
and yet all this stuff seems to be all these things that used to seem separate, the ideas of vampires and
yeah,
dragons and UFOs are all one the same story. Like
yeah,
it's all the same thing that's been happening. It's just been, as we were talking about earlier, like literally the different names for the same beings.
yep,
And like, but now it's just like all of this is basically based upon. It's as if not as if, but just the there. And this is where I forget reading like there's more than one flood, if I'm correct. Like it was as if there was sort of what you were saying, like the true celestial gods, and like that epoch, or which then led to sort of the then the next epoch was sort of whenever humans and sort of the demigods ruled the earth until now, which is like the Noah's time, which is basically the children of the Nephilim are ruling, as you were just talking about, where it's basically
yep,
the science has made it to where their sort of monstrosities have sort of dwindled away, and now it's
yep,
truly just the religious aspect that still exists. But
yeah,
where all of them funnel together into these like end times, and we're now like you're saying it's like escalating to where we're all starting to like sort of realize this again. They're starting to come
yep,
out more in the open.
yeah. So
And
this and this religious aspect that you're talking about, I call it global Gnosticism in book one, just to put a term of it,
yeah.
but that's what the Westerns would kind of call it as well. But it's a unification of that ancient religion that they're trying to bring back. And Gnosticism is rooted in the Greek word gnosis for knowledge. And it's a knowledge-based religion. Always has been, always will be. And in the end time, as in the New Atlantis that we talked about, there's a reconvergence of religion and knowledge and sciences in the end time. And so we should expect that this knowledge religion and the technology it would produce when developed would produce something like angelic intelligent technology. In other words, AI.
Mm-hmm.
And that this AI would have been in prehistory as well, because nothing is new under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know what this AI is. It's the idea is to sort of somehow get it to be a sentient being, if that were possible through technology. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if it's not an artificial intelligence and it's something to do with an offspring of angels and their intelligence and knowledge that they provided, then you could imagine something that could be a dwelling place for a disembodied spirit of a giant. We
Mm-hmm.
would know that as a demon. And so when you have um, the people within the industry, like Renzi, who says, this technology of AI is applied demonology, or Elon Musk, who's saying, developing AI is summoning the demon. You have to be aware of what they're not just saying that tongue in cheek. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's something to that. These algorithms for AI have what they call invisible algorithms that work in the background that guide the objectives, and they're
Yeah.
invisible, which is like the invisible ones or a spirit being. But in their jargon, they have the narcissism to call them daemon algorithms. Daemon is the Greek word for demon,
Mm-hmm.
and demon is the beings that Jesus is depossessing from people in the New Testament. In the King James Version Bible, we get them as unclean spirits there, and used interchangeably, these three terms: unclean spirits, evil spirits, and devil spirits. Devil is the Greek word daemon. It should not be translated as devil. That's diablos in Greek, that's used to describe the devil. This is a poor translation. It should be demons there. So these are the disembodied spirits of the giants, and they don't go to sleep when they die because they're a counterfeited spirit. And so they have to wander the earth, or if they do really horrible things, they go to the pit prison. And in the occult, if they have enough knowledge and got everything done, that they would make it to live with their gods in Sheol or Hades or the other world or another dimension. We are also referencing earlier. So AI could possibly be something known as an oiketerian. That's a Greek word that shows up in the New Testament in Jude 1:6 for the habitation that the original angels who sinned at the time of Sodom and the flood left. And it's also translated in 2 Corinthians 5:2 as a house in heaven that we long for, even though we have our own house on the earth. That word house in heaven is oiketerian. It means a dwelling place for a spirit. So a spirit for a human comes from God, and it merges with a soul and a body of the physical world. And then when we die, we go into a sleep-like state, and that spirit goes back to heaven until whichever resurrection that we're going to have. A ghost spirit of that we would understand one of the derivative words of a Rephaim giant, as in the Repha spirit, is a ghost spirit, a disembodied spirit of the Rephaim giants. The disembodied spirits of giants, they don't sleep because they're a counterfeit spirit and they're not allowed into heaven. So they will have to wander the earth and look for a place to rest in. And the only way they can rest is possess a person and suppress the host. And so we have um, passages in the Bible about um, these this technology that shows up after the flood. And one sort of deduces it probably comes down through Nimrod and Babel, where all of this knowledge was back on display, according to the polytheists, and the knowledge that he was accessing that was buried underneath the pyramid in their accounts. But we have a term called teraphim in the Bible, and it means a talking idol. And generally, we're told that idols don't talk in the Bible, but there's three different terms for idols. Teraphim is a specific one. It's the idol in the time of Jacob and Rachel, um, where they're leaving and Rachel steals Laban's family idol. And he comes after it because it's the most prized thing that he has. It should be translated teraphim there, not as a family idol. But sometimes that talking idol is translated directly as teraphim in the Bible, but it's not done consistently. So you don't see it as many times as it would be seen in Hebrew, is what I'm saying. Well, this word teraphim is a derivative of 7495 in the lexicon of Rapha, which means to heal. So you get an angel in the KJV Apocrypha in the book of Enoch named Raphael. In Hebrew, that means God heals. or healer of God because this means to heal, just as it's the source word for Raphaim or Rapha. And the Raphaim or the Rapiu or the RPM in the original Semitic in the Ugaritic text, the offspring of Baal, who were called healers. They could heal themselves and heal others just by touching and whatever else, maybe technology they had. It's not, don't give us all the detail as to how they healed. Well, it also produces 7496, which is the demon spirit, and then 7497, which is the tribe of giants, three separate words, all carrying part of the source meaning with it. And also 7495 produces teraphim. So this seems to be a talking idol where a demon spirit can dwell in. It's an oiketarian, some sort of technological oiketarian. And this is not that long after Babel, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it seems to, that's the only place I could sort of deduce biblically because Abraham used, he lived in um, Sumer under Nimrod before leaving. And then, a generation or so later, you have Jacob returning for a wife, just as Isaac went back there for a wife. Again, as you talked
Hmm.
about, bloodlines are talked about a lot in the Bible. So I think that when we're looking at this end time technology as part of that religion coming together, we should be prepared for a religion that's going to embrace artificial intelligence and also a religion that's coming that's going to embrace whatever the disclosure is on these aliens. And to date, they've shown four. They should have at least shown five, like the Anunnaki should have been shown as well. But they got these four subgroups that they've shown at this point in time. There's more than that, but those are all creatures out of prehistory. They've been with us all along.
Yeah. That's what's so amazing about it. It's like it's
Yeah,
just once again, it's like it's just everything forever that has seemingly been unrelated, such
yeah,
as these like four different species of aliens, or really there's more, but kind of four that have been presented as if like these are in the files, as if there's just like one thing or whatever. But it's like it's all coming together and been like, yeah, it's always been this way. Everything you
yeah,
thought of, from mermaids to fairies and like uh you thought it was just a dream or something someone made
yeah.
up. It's like, nope, it's all connected. It's all a
Yeah,
big thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We called you guys conspiracy theorists, but we're lying.
Yeah. Eh,
You know,
You've been right the whole
as
time. Yeah,
usual. Yeah, as usual. We've been lying.
it's so obvious though, that, like you said, that is, or I mean, to me, it seems like it to probably to anyone else that just like it all still bundles together. That's where I think I'm unsure of how to like present this to like my audience that's not into any of this stuff
Yeah,
to where it does just seem like you have to break so many like
yeah,
barriers to even get to even try to listen to this,
yeah.
it's just
Let me throw something out there for your audience here, and they can relate. I think most of the people in the audience to, Lord of the Rings and the trilogy and Tolkien's works, and so if some of those creatures are directly related in those four different groups that supposedly that are part of these different species, but at the end of Tolkien's trilogy, he has all of these crazy creatures on a boat sailing away because now it's the age of man. That's an allegory for that's the time of the flood. And when all those other types of creatures walked openly amongst humans, that time is gone. So when we look at the Lord of the Rings, we have these white elves that are shown in the Lord of the Rings. And they're the taller ones, and they have a pale skin and these elf ears, and they're kind of like a higher level of being, right? But and there's humans and there's a bunch of other ones, but this is a notable, interesting royale type of creature, as I
yeah.
would call them. Well, that is something called the Shea people. or the seed people, or the she people, or the shed people. And you can Google a painting called Riders of the She or the Riders of the Sede or the Seed. It's pronounced, don't worry about how to pronounce it. Everybody pronounces it differently, whatever country you come from. So all the same beings. And these are the same type of beings. And they're riding these large white horses with these unicorn helmets on. They got all this serpentine imagery of these. This seed or Sede or She people are the Tuatha De Danann or the Tuatha Danu. They are the Dawin people. Um, and Dawin, as we understand that, are the people of the stars. So they're the star people. Um, and these are the giants, the fair people, the fair folk. These are Scythians.
Yeah.
And they're not shown as their full size in there as how they would have been at one time. But that's one of these groups of people. They're not little ones like the dark elves. Those are three other groups. But that's the Nordic group, as they call them,
Yep.
in
Yep.
that sort of release that they did. I didn't do the release. I'm just
Yeah.
telling you
You're
that
just.
this is nothing new. This is there. There's also a group of elementals that are very much related with aliens as well. And so we have three groups of little ones, and then we have a larger one. So the larger one is a reptilian being, and it's called a salamander, and they're called elementals related in the cult religions with earth, wind, fire, water, and earth, I think is the four. And so fire is related for the salamanders. That's the same sort of type of being that they're presenting. It's taller than a human, but not as big as a giant. These ones
Hmm.
are have a couple different mythoses to it, sometimes living in the earth or in another dimension, but also a reptilian is part of the alien sort of mythos, and they're higher than the three smaller groups of elementals. And so this is very much similar to a being that was in the past called the serpent in Eden, where the whole species was lost their intelligence, lost their legs, lost their limbs, whether their wings or arms, lost their ability to speak, and are forced to crawl on the ground like a serpent. So what it actually looked like, we don't know. We only know biblically what a snake looks like today. That's Nahash in Hebrew. Its source word is also Nahash, meaning a enchanter, a necromancer, a sorcerer, a geomancer, all words you would use for a priest or a priestess of a polytheist religion.
Hmm.
And this being is created on day 6 before humans are. And if 2 Peter 3 that I quoted as a passage, which is a super passage in the Bible, if a day is like 1,000 years, just also we get the same sort of equivalent to that in Psalms 90. So two accountings of this. A day is like 1,000 years. So a day for God is like 1,000 years for us. Then you could have had in day 6 there 1,000 years between the creation of the serpent and the humans there. And in Genesis 3, where the story in the Eden account happens, the serpent, the Nahash, is a beast of the field. So that's how I know where it's accounted for as being a created. It's just the length of time. And it was, according to the Gnostics, as big as a camel, so taller than a human that could do much more work and much stronger and very intelligent from the biblical account. And so, if the fallen angels, following the same MO as we talked about earlier, saved Nephilim somehow and Rephaim somehow for the end time, did they save some of the hash serpent? That was an image after the seraphim look as
Mm.
dragons, as serpent-faced gods,
Yeah.
like the Ogdoad gods, like the feathered serpents and plumed serpents, like the Nagas, like the dragon creator gods. These are the seraphim gods, which are the same as the Uraeus gods that Osiris is depicted as a flying serpent. Baal is depicted that way. El is. Originally, Zeus was. On and on, Anki and Enlil. This is the most common serpentine god populating the council of the gods. So that's group two. Group three is the um, is the little gray, as I recall. I'm going
Yeah.
right to left with the images that I saw. Well, these beings have flying machines, UAPs, they kidnap people, do sexual experimentation. Very, very famous in the alien mythos, the most common one. And in these three groups of elementals, and in each of these groups, there's many, many groups. So in the ugly ones, then you have good-looking ones, like Neroids and sprites and mermaids and nymphs and sylphs. And then you have mischievous ones that are like leprechauns and pixies and brownies and Menuhay. And then the ugly ones where I'm going to connect into here, these are include like the dark elves, which are ugly ones like with Santa Claus and all of the other dark side imagery that comes with it. Dwarves, and dwarves made the weapons for the gods, just as they're depicted in Lord of the Rings in the earth, in these great
Hmm.
factories. Okay, that's what they do in the occult. You also have, trolls, and trolls can be giant ones or smaller ones, but they're the ones that guard crossings to um, the other world and under a
Yeah.
bridge allegorically, as you get in some of the fairy
Yep.
tales. But the one I'm going to get to are gnomes. And the gnomes in the occult of the elementals are the ones that control all of the technology and the genealogies and the knowledge of the demigods. And they have UAPs as well and flying machines. And they come through fairy portals, fairy dolmens, Dolmen. Google that, you'll get two stones like this in a slab. It's the portal and it's a
Yeah,
dolmen.
like Stonehenge.
And yeah, so they like Stonehenge exactly, which is several portals in a ring,
Hmm.
right? And Gilgal Raphaim, the wheel of the giants or the wheel of the spirits, at the foot of Mount Hermon has 100 dolmens as well inside of it. It's a common polytheist doctrine of portals, interdimensional sort of travel. Well, they come through these portals with their UAPs and they kidnap people, do sexual experimentations. They got to revive their DNA. They do other things and return them. People don't have a memory. I put two descriptions of fairy abductions, one about 150 years ago, and another one about 400 years ago. That if you didn't know it was a fairy gnome abduction, you'd swear it was a gray alien abduction because it's identical.
Yeah.
So,
Dang that.
so again, we've accounted for another one. And what's also interesting as well is that we have um, elementals recorded in Galatians 4, yeah, 4 and 9 in the verses where it says elementals that are working with the powers and principalities to enslave us in this world. And then you get the same sort of accountings in the book of Colossians twice as well. And these ones are called rudiments there, but doing the same thing and working with the fallen angels that we're not supposed to worship. And that word rudiment goes back to the same word as element or elemental there. And it's the Greek word stoichian. And so all of a sudden now we have biblical reference to giants for the Nordics. We have these grays as elementals and all these other types that would be part of the elementals as well, including the reptilian being. And now we only have the mantis.
Oh yeah, I
And
forgot the mantis. Yes.
and it's like a praying mantis. And I don't know whether that's allegorical or there's some other technology in here, but all of these creatures in mythology, whether or not it's the elementals or these reptilian beings or the fallen angels, they are the offspring of the fallen angels or the gods.
Yeah.
Okay. And so are the mantis. And the mantis are like the ant people in the Hopi tradition. And what these ant people did was they created safe havens in the earth to survive the flood for the Hopi people. And so they had some sort of prophecy or technology that suggested some sort of catastrophe was coming where they helped them in that account. In the Greek account, all the people are killed on this one island. So Zeus creates a whole set of races out of an ant, right?
Hmm.
Or out of mantis, I'm sorry, out of a mantis and out of these insects and creates these people. So again, we have a similar sort of story. And what was really interesting in the Greek language is that mantis is rooted in a Greek word, mantis spelled the same way, or with an EIS at the end. And that means a seer or an oracle, often
Hmm.
equated with a prophet, but they're distinct from a prophet in the actual sort of application, which now kind of connects back to being an ant person, knowing something was coming to help save the Hopi people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So again, we have this fourth class that comes out of prehistory. And I don't know what type of technology it takes to combine an intelligence, a spirit into an insect body.
Yeah.
That's way beyond what we have. But those beings are there in prehistory. And you have
Hmm.
scorpion beings and other types of creatures that are related to the insectoids as well. So we should pay attention to prehistory if we want to have any idea of what is going to be ahead of us, because nothing is new under the sun.
Yeah, man, that's where I like come to where I try to talk to people about this stuff, where it's just like, how can you sort of just dismiss so much about what was written as like what we're just talking about now of
Yeah,
like if you're looking at ancient Egypt and they're talking about sort of half man, half dog face kind of things, and it's just like there's probably something to this. And it's
yeah,
not just them, it's all over everywhere forever that we've
yeah,
had these sorts of things, and they all different times and different cultures all talk about the same thing. Like you have
yeah,
to be able to connect. You seems like everybody should be connecting these dots and not,
yeah,
but for some reason we just sort of are just like, nope, like basically year zero, we follow
yeah,
this and that's
yeah.
that. And then nobody knows anything beyond that. It was just hunter
So,
gatherers that just told stories.
yeah. So what we can take from all of this, I think, which may help just a little bit, is we've never been told the whole hidden history or the whole truth. We're
Yeah.
not going to get told the whole truth going forward either. We're going to get part of the truth intermixed with the narrative they want to have. And they're leaning heavily towards intergalactic, but polytheism and
Mm,
science indicates interdimensional.
yeah.
So I think they're leading us to intergalactic there so that we don't get triggered into looking at things that makes more sense and connecting the dots before it's too late.
Yeah, that is where it's like people it makes sense that you would sort of guide us into being like, oh, there's different kings of different planets. Not that
Yeah,
there's like layers to dimensions that's
yeah,
too much. That's too much of the truth.
yeah,
We have to make them think that there's just like different rulers of
yeah,
different just pretend the earth and like the structures of
yeah,
hierarchy are a bit expanded.
yeah. So I'm going to connect a couple of dots here for people that might freak people out just a little bit. But um, so Prince Charles is on record before he becomes king and takes his oath to a specific god, likely a celestial mafia godfather that he has a genealogical connection to. Um, he said that he has a genealogy in part that takes him back. And again, this will likely go back through the Hanover connection of Germany as the original name for the Windsors, back to a fellow by the name of Vlad the Impaler, whom was the character Dracula was based on. Dracula
Hmm.
means with the A on the end, son of a dragon, rooted in the Greek Draconta and Dracont for a watcher god. So again, all of the imagery, and they use the imagery of a noble Celt for Dracula. Um, and he's got this pale skin. And Vlad the Impaler, according to Lawrence Gardner, although I see images where Vlad is depicted with dark hair, but he's, according to the occult records, he had red hair and pale skin. And Vlad is basically a term for a king and a leader. And Vladimir, if it's a full name, Emir and Mir all go back in its etymology to a prince of a bloodline as well. Um, so we have Vlad the Impaler, Dracula, son of a dragon, who had red hair, pale eyes, green eyes or hazel eyes, educated at a mystery school in Austria, and who is a royale who is understood as the Carpathian prince of the Shea or the Seed people. He's a Tuatha De Danann, right? And through the Draculaski bloodline and other families, they trace their genealogies back to a Scythian tribe called the Agrathi, which was a tribe that was produced by Hercules, son of Alcmene and Zeus, so part of the Cretagens. But there's another scion in there I won't bore people with, but just sort of connect dots to what we've talked about today, and that he was understood as a portal guardian.
Hmm.
As a king, that Dracula is part of the undead,
Yeah.
right? That drinks blood for immortality in the physical world. And so these connections that we have in our entertainment are always talking about their history, their main heroes, and their religion. And they put all of their understanding and words into terms that they know we're not smart enough to understand. So they hide things in plain sight.
Oh man, I feel like I could talk to you just endlessly because it's like I have it just to bring to people like what like
Yeah.
especially how you do it where it's like you start at least the first book where it's like you take the basically the Bible or and you
Yeah.
kind of start there to where it's like you're going through almost family by family or you start
Yep.
about like heroes of old but it's like
Yep.
you even are connecting like the families are like you were just saying like the giants themselves split into different
Yes.
tribes and different families
Yes.
and then the
Yes.
history of sort of I did not realize that sort of Christianity itself, not to mention all the other religions, are like different people, so many different like subgroups of people that were like sort of also try like telling the same story. And I guess my final question to you is like, what like how did they come up with or what we call the Bible today? I've never really seen a good thorough explanation of like
Yeah.
how did we come up with those different books to call the Bible?
Yeah.
And did it and with so much of the history of it is like it's basically different people telling different stories across all this, but how do we know like the King James Bible today? What are those different books and what of it is
Yeah.
like do you think is like this is sort of the truth? And like of the people that are writing this, like what is sort of the true story here that we
Yeah.
should be following?
Yeah. So you would piece the canon that is out there today um, through, I would say, basically two different source groups. So the Old Testament comes down from the Jewish people that they kept their records of right since the time of Moses, from about
Yeah.
1450
Okay.
BC, right? Okay, and then obviously additional history that was added on top of the Torah, that and they recorded as it came down, and that's the Masoretic text. And so essentially, the Old Testament comes from the Masoretic text and the KJV. Now, you'll see some Aramaic texts that are used for some of the Bible that is technically older in dating just because those parchments are older, but the history and how the chain of command is way better from the Masoretic text because it was all through the Jewish people. So could you get a corruption in there? You could, except that they match up to the older versions that we have all the way back to about 700 BC.
And
So,
that's the
but
part that's basically like what you're going through is like lineages. Like most of
Yes.
that
Yeah.
portion is just like tribes and their lineages. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, continue.
And then the New Testament are Greek manuscripts because that was the language of the larger empire of the Roman Empire at that time. Latin wasn't the full language, it was still Greek from the time of the Greek Empire before that. So it's written down in Greek and not Hebrew, which is problematic to a certain degree for a researcher like me, because if it was the same language, I don't have to try and figure out which words were written down from either Aramaic language or Hebrew language that went into Greek
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
just the Hebrew language. It would be like if I wanted to find Gibborim in the New Testament, it would be there. I could match it up if I wanted, right? Just would make things a lot easier, but it's down in the Greek. So what they tried to do with the Greek, and they put the same test to some of the Old Testament books as well, that they couldn't verify the author, they didn't use it. They couldn't verify the accuracy of that scripture with a chain of command, then they wouldn't use it. So you have like the books of Enoch not included in there.
Yeah.
And it's not that you can't trace a lot of that back to original Hebrew. We just don't have an original Hebrew manuscript for it.
Hmm.
So, and there are some corruptions in there as well. Um, and I wouldn't say there's a huge amount. It looks about 99%. And there could have been certain portions like the prophetic side that were added later. So it's in doubt to, is it all accurate? And we don't have that original Hebrew manuscript. So, but on the other side of it with the New Testament, they were looking to get the oldest ones that they could possibly get, and to when they wrote the King James Version Bible and used those, did not particularly use the Septuagint because it's, and most Greek versions of the Old Testament have a lot of errors in them, which is why they didn't use that for the Old Testament. But for the New Testament, you get down to the Council of Nicaea that's going to assemble this canon, and they're trying to decide what's going to go into the New Testament and what's going to go into the Old Testament. So I think the consistency of the passages that they used in the New and the Old Testament, testifies to they did a pretty good job on that. But the question remains is what else could have been in there that could have been more helpful?
Yeah. Where, yeah, dang it. I don't want to go on. It's 9:30 my time, so I'm basically out of time. But there's so much more wish I could dive into. Well, I'll have to try to schedule a future date to continue
Yeah.
more. But I guess
Yeah.
I'll close on like,
And one last thing, and again, this won't mean much to non-Christians, but for the New Testament, the recalling of what happened to write it down. And again, there's many different authors, and but the recalling of it to get the details right was done by the Holy Spirit. And we get that as a passage that was how it was going to be recalled for them and then done so for them to help them get get it all as accurate as possible.
oh,
And with the Holy Spirit, you would think it would be accurate. Now, again, if you're non-Christian, you would say, well, I don't believe anything in the Bible anyway, so why would I believe that the Holy Spirit actually did that? I get that. But from a monotheist perspective, that's kind of the scriptural certainty that we would have. And it was the job of the Jewish people to keep the sacred texts accurate. Right? And that's why,
hmm,
and they would renew them as they renewed them. In other words, if they got old and worn, they just did new ones and copied them down and made sure they were accurate, and the old ones would be destroyed. So you're not going to have, ancient scrolls from 1400 BC because they're used all of the time. And the other thing I would throw out there just for Christians and for non-Christians is that do I not know that the Epic of Gilgamesh is older than the Torah? Yes, I do know that because it has to be. We get a dating and it's even older than the 12 tablets that they have of the Epic of Gilgamesh, about 2150 BC. It has to be older because the Torah doesn't even come down to Moses till 1450 to 1400 BC. Of course, it's an older record, but it
yeah,
doesn't mean that the accounts of what's in the Bible is inaccurate.
Well, that's where, yeah, it seems like, at least from my perspective, it's like it shouldn't be that much of a stretch, or as if like everything's nullified just because the sort of older texts is talking about, like we're talking about now, like Nephilim
Yeah,
gods or whatever, or that there's
yeah,
basically alien beings that sort of took rulership over sections of the earth and possibly realms and or whatever. That doesn't nullify or act like that there is no such thing as angels or God, or that
yeah,
the sort of the overall message of all this is different or something like that. In
yeah,
fact, to me, it makes it grounded even more to where
yeah,
it actually makes more sense. Actually, the more
yeah,
elaborate that, the deeper down these rabbit holes you go or
yeah,
whatever, the more it makes sense to me. It
yeah,
doesn't seem to like disband or make everything
yeah.
nonsensical. It actually seems to be more uplifting, really. Like it's like, oh, well, now it
Now it
all
makes
of these
sense. Yeah,
lessons of life make
yeah,
more sense. Or like,
yeah,
and even from the lessons of the perspective of those doing the evil or whatever.
yeah,
Like to at least to me. So it's like for Christians and non-Christians to sort of see it as like I don't know, like as if like the idea of, well, there's older texts or something like
yeah,
that is like makes the Christian
yeah,
Bible less
yeah,
relevant. It's like, no, now
yeah.
it actually makes even more sense to me.
Yeah, because it's telling about the same things.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
and
They're
it's
all
the
telling
common
the same story.
denominators. Yes,
Yeah, the
just
same
see it
common
through the
denominator.
different
Yeah.
lens. And for people who would say, well, but angel, how, angels aren't aliens. Well, of course they're aliens. They come from the spirit realm of heaven. They're not of the earth. They're aliens. And so
Yeah.
when it talks about them being the stars of the host of heaven and coming from the stars, as aliens do in the alien mythos, it's talking about the same thing.
The same story. Yeah,
It's the
exactly. We
same
just have
story. It's
different
just
terms for it.
different terms and a different understanding of how advanced these beings were.
Yeah. And oh man. So what's the book that the fiction book you're writing? Has that come out yet?
Yeah, it released April 1st, and it's this book here. It's called The Opprimo Conspiracy, AI's Covenant with Babylon. And it's a novel. The co-author is Bill Carmichael, and he's my publisher, and he wanted to do a book that's a novel because it's a larger market and sort of take my research on prehistory and eschatology more mainstream. And this is bringing together my research into putting together the characters and the two opposing forces, AI's influence on the end time, and that's the Opprimo Wall, and it's merging with the religion of the end time. But all the characters and locations and bloodlines we create for the characters and the secret societies, some of are created, some aren't, are to give sort of that nothing is new under the sun. And this is an ancient story that continues to play out and showing how, from our perspective, where we are today, how we're going to get to the last 7 years, and then how do the last 7 years play out. So, as we look at it, from this book, it ends at the opening of the third seal and the introduction of the fourth seal, and we're starting to move into the last 7 years um, with that information. So it's to create a sense of intrigue and entertainment to have people sort of grasp all of these ideas. Eschatology is so big, so many details, and so many different views. So it uses my eschatology as well. And in book two, I actually lay down what my eschatology is in the preface.
Maybe that's what I need to read now because I have not. I mean, yeah, what got me into this, I was like, I don't know how to adapt this into anything like entertaining to where
Yeah,
it's just too massive to where it's like if you start going, kind of like the approach you took, which is
yeah,
very scholarly, you kind of get lost in the weeds. It's like how do you tell such a massive story and sort of like without it just seeming, because all of life and all of entertainment, like we were just talking about earlier, is sort of like with Dracula and Vlad the Impaler, like we're telling the same stories over, and our mythology and our entertainment, the
Yep.
entire mythology and hero's journey and arc is based upon sort of these same stories forever.
Yep.
So it's like, how do you to tell it as if like this is sort of the true version of it? It just
Yep.
blends into sort of the way we're already telling
Yeah.
everything. So yeah, it's been
Yeah.
hard for me to figure out
So
how I want to approach it, but
yeah, yeah. And here's another thing I'll just throw out there. There's in the elementals, and I'm not convinced they're part of the elementals. I think these are just more of the spiritual realm on it, but there's a term called a sprite.
yeah,
And so what they actually are Scythian ghost warrior spirits. They're demons.
yeah.
And when they were alive, these individuals would paint their bodies blue, like the Pictidae people out of Scotland.
Yeah. Oh man. That's where. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I could just go on forever. I'll just treat you as AI, and I just ask you questions until I can't stop. But um, yeah, this has been awesome. If I go on any further, I still won't stop. So I'll just cut it short here, and I'll try to funnel people to all your books. And your
Yep.
main website is just your name, right? Or where do
Well,
people
it's
find you?
yeah, the best way to get a hold of me is through my website. That's the Genesis6conspiracy.com, the number 6conspiracy.com. On that website, there's a contact the author. There's a generous write-up on each chapter of book one and book two. There's a small write-up on the new book. As soon as the Audible version is out, I'll get the Kindle connections and the Audible connections and all the connections over to Amazon for the book. It is available on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. And if you like what I say, you want to learn more about my research, you can go to the Buy Now page. And buy page one is for book one, buy page two is for book two. And if you're wondering where to start, if you're really familiar with the Bible, you start with book two, and then you'll want to read book one. If you're not that familiar or not familiar at all, start with book one and then feel see how far you want to go into book two, because book two is really directed at Christians and it goes deeper into the Bible in terms of prehistory and prophecy than any other writer has done before. Book three, or by page three, is for the Opprimo Conspiracy. There are discounts for buying more than one book on each of those first three buy pages. Buy page four is a bundling page for book one and two with discounts, and buy page five is bundling for all three books.
It's funny, we never even got to sort of the business side of you as an author, which is the main things I talk about. It's just too much. We got too much to talk about. Like it's too epic. But I do want to ask, dang it, we were just talking about the book, your website. What was I gonna ask? Oh, how did you hire whoever did the audiobook? Was that
Um,
random or do you know?
no, no. So I tried for years to get my book one done on Audible, and everybody would look at it and say, no, it's too big of a project and too costly. And
Yeah,
Audible hadn't hit full strength till about 3 or 4 years ago, right? And then when I
yeah,
came out with book two, I actually was contacted by a couple of people who have done Audible audiobooks like on the Book of Enoch and stuff like that. And they said, we'd really like, doing an Audible version on your book. And I said, well, I've been down this path many times. So the answer is yes, of course. But once you get a look at it, you're going to say, no, it's too difficult, too complicated, too much money. They said, no, 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 we already have had a look at it. We want it. We want to do it. So then I got a hold of my publisher because he doesn't do Audible, although he's on the Opprimo one. It's going to be the first one that they do on their own as a publisher. Um, and I brought him in on it because they hold all of the rights as the publisher, right? So,
yeah,
and then we got it done. So what they did was they went down, and I wanted some things, and that I wanted for the reader was one, I wanted somebody who understood the language of prehistory. And I don't have to agree on all of the pronunciations because everybody's going to pronounce things differently, and they do. But I need somebody who can talk about this like it's not a foreign language to them,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
That's why
And
I
and
was asking because like it seemed like a huge task, and yeah, like luckily the guy who did it did a good job. But it is funny that the pronunciations are not how like
not
it's not
how I say it.
Anunnaki,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
Anunnaki or so. I can't remember. He says
yeah,
certain words, so I'm just like, what?
yeah. And he has an understanding of all of these words, but not
But
as
yeah,
how I would or how they're normally used in. And he's gone to more of a older pronunciation on them. And my publisher said, no, you should go through and every time it's pronounced differently, you should have them change it. I said, it'll never get done. Right.
no,
It just
yeah,
be took. No, it's just like I accept things are pronounced differently and you'll never get a consensus on it. So
no,
as long
yeah. And me
as
as
he
a
does
reader,
it,
that's how I was.
yeah,
I was just like, oh, interesting. He says it
yeah,
that way. Okay.
yeah.
And
Yeah. And he
but then you just
pronounces,
go right on. But yeah.
yeah, the only one I really thought was really weird was Rosicrucian.
Yeah, that's right. He didn't say it that I forget how
Like
he
that at
pronounces it,
all.
but it wasn't
Yeah.
that. It wasn't Rosicrucian.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, but luckily, like, I mean, he did a really good job of all the intricacies of like author's note, this thing, because like there's a lot you have
Yeah.
that's like in parentheses, and he did a
Yes.
great job with and no mistakes or like no like I would think that I've listened to other audiobooks and you still hear kind of like discrepancies or whatever, but
Yeah.
yeah, anyway, that's awesome. All
Yeah.
right,
So it
I
was a
will let you
process.
go now.
Yeah. So then, yeah, I got like, I don't know how many ones I had to listen to. Then we got it down to like three, and we gave them some more stuff to look at, and then I selected from there.
It is, I mean, it is like to listen to the whole thing, the first book, it's like 15 or more hours, or maybe more than that. It's a
Oh,
really
more.
long time
It's
or
almost
something.
40 hours, I think.
40
Yeah.
out 50
Yeah.
hours. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like yeah,
50. Yeah.
not 15. So yeah, it's an insane task to do. It's like that means somebody had to talk that out. You know, the rule in like filmmaking is like 10
Yeah.
times. So that means like
Yeah.
he probably did 40 hours times 10 to get all those right. Oh my goodness. Alrighty then. You have a good night, and
You
I'll be
too.
reaching out to you again. I'll be talking to you through email
Okay. Yeah. Send me the link when you publish, and I'll put it
for
on my
sure. Yeah.
Medium. Yep.
Alrighty then.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.